Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Angela Sierra. I'm with the California Department of Justice, and I am the Attorney General's representative on the RIPA board, and I'm a co-chair of this subcommittee focused on civilian complaints. So glad everybody can join us this afternoon.
Hi,
Lawanda?
everyone.
Mhm.
Oh, Lawanda. Okay,
Oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No problem. No, go ahead. You, Lawanda.
Hi, my name is LaWanda Hawkins, and I'm a board member of the RIPA program.
Hey, everybody. I'm Sahar Durali, a board member. I'm currently the co-chair through the end of this year of the board. I'm an associate director of litigation and policy at Legal Aid in LA, Neighborhood Legal Services. Who else from the board is on?
Aisha, do we have any other board members?
There's no other board members at this time.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I didn't know 3 makes a quorum.
Yeah, there are 5 on the subcommittee.
Yeah, go ahead, Aisha.
Yes,
Oh,
there
got
are
it.
5 on the subcommittee, so 3, you are good.
All right. Sounds great.
Okay.
So the next agenda item is approval of the minutes from June 1st, 2020. Were you there, Angela?
No, I wasn't, but as I understand, I've reviewed them and I can vote on them as I understand it.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the June 1st, 2020 subcommittee minutes.
I'll second the motion.
And I think we may have to each take a vote, so I'll vote yes.
Yes.
I vote yes.
Great.
Great.
Looks like the
So then it looks like next we're going to receive an update from the Department of Justice on the work they're doing on the issues, the focus of the subcommittee.
Just
So I'll turn it
before we
over
begin,
to DOJ staff. Oh, go ahead.
thank you. I just want to check in. I believe board member Nancy Frausto has been able to join. I wanted to check if your audio is working, Reverend Frausto.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
It's working.
Do you want to introduce yourself, Reverend Frausto?
I apologize. My microphone was off. Reverend Nancy Frausto from Long Beach, California.
Great. Welcome.
Reverend Frausto, can you turn on your video? Is that possible?
Yes,
Oh, there you are.
I have people coming in and out, so I may have to turn it off a bit just because it'll get really distracting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. So should we turn it over to our DOJ for the DOJ presentation?
Yes.
Great.
Do we have Dominique on the line? There she is.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I'm going to share my screen so that we can share with you what we have worked on since the subcommittee meeting. And I know it's probably very small right now, so let me make this a little bigger. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
So just really quick before we continue, does someone from the DOJ mind linking the agenda in the chat box in case any member of the public doesn't have it? I'm going to look for it too, but if you have it more handy, the online link.
Sure, I'll add that right now.
Thank you.
I do want to share though.
I'm sorry, Dominique. Let me just. I'm also emailing all of you what Dominique is sharing. It's just taking me a second because I don't have all the addresses are not showing up in my email. So in about a minute, I will send all of you what Dominique is also sharing.
It's taken us a bit of time to do this in time for posting it before the meeting, but it will be eventually posted, and I'm sharing my screen now, and you all should receive it soon. But so essentially, since the last full board meeting, which was back in September, the members of this subcommittee requested that we do some more sort of in-depth research and create something that could be included in the board's report about early intervention systems. And what we have so far is, I would say, sort of a foundation for you all to build on in the future. EIS is very large. There's a lot of literature on it, both just to understand how intervention system works, both as a broad sort of type of mechanism, but also individually within agencies and what those best practices might be. And there's also sort of more literature review that could be done on, say, the effectiveness of these systems. So to the extent that when we go through this, this is really sort of a background document understanding what early intervention systems are, some best practices that folks have already shared. Both a lot of this information sort of came from the U.S. Department of Justice. It comes from the COPS office within that agency, as well as sort of consent decrees that they have entered into with other agencies to reform their accountability systems, and other sort of research groups that have done research on early intervention systems. And so as we go through, if there are things that sort of come up that you all want sort of more information or not to include, or things that, just that you would like sort of presented differently, please feel free to share those with me. And I will try to make sure that everybody can see what we've done. So as you can see right now on the screen, this is sort of the introduction. And I think, what we included here was sort of putting context to what the board requested and why. I think a lot of it, as Member Durali mentioned at previous subcommittee meetings, is there was a connection to the uprisings of racial injustice and the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and the fact that complaints have been filed against those officers. And so we included some information on that as part of the introduction. And so the next sort of section, I hope you all can see, it says early intervention system use in law enforcement. This section sort of provides a background showing when these systems have sort of begun to be used by agencies, how they're used, and essentially what are the key components to an early intervention system. And for those who may not be able to see the screen, I will share that what we include here is that key components for an early intervention system include an ability to identify at-risk behaviors, an evaluation of those behaviors that may be flagged by the system, interventions that are taken by the agency or through supervisors to address that behavior, and monitoring to ensure that the change become long-term. And so there are, in order to identify certain behaviors, these systems use what are called indicators. And literature doesn't really tell us how much or how many indicators are sort of the best practice, or which specific indicators are the best practice to ensure that all at-risk behavior will be notified. But there are sort of a grouping of different indicators that generally are used by most agencies, but the number can vary from agency to agency. And so the next sort of still introductory section talks a little bit about how some of these systems, when there are flagged behaviors, sort of work. So in some early intervention systems, an individual's behavior can be flagged for one sort of category, one indicator. Each indicator sort of has a threshold, and when an officer meets that threshold, there is a flag on that officer or that event that happened with that officer. Some agencies require an intervention when there is only one flag for one category, or there can be a situation where an officer may be almost reaching the threshold over various indicators, and that they want to know when someone is in that position as well to ensure that interventions are put in before that person, say, reaches a threshold and some sort of at-risk behavior happens. Other types of EIS will have sort of a multi-layered approach, which means that there may be different colored flags. So maybe something is more minor and something is more serious, or if someone meets the threshold once, that may be sort of room for intervention, but if someone meets that threshold again, the intervention may be different, and so those flags may show up differently to a supervisor. And so the next section goes over sort of what the importance is, or in order for these systems to be sort of effective, it requires that there be very proactive and engaged supervisors, and that those supervisors are obviously supervising their line officers, but also that the supervisors in charge of supervising line officers are also being supervised by their management staff. So in some ways, there may be an early intervention system for officer behavior, and there should also be sort of a second tier early intervention system to ensure that supervisors are also sort of responding to flags, or whether or not their effectiveness in providing interventions is actually working. So that is something that many systems sort of, there's that multi-layered approach. And I think in a lot of the literature as well, and what we include here, is that much of, depending on the agency and what kind of accountability systems that already exist within an agency, a supervisor's workload may change significantly with the incorporation of an early intervention system, or it may not, depending on what they already do. But it is imperative that there be adequate training on how to spot sort of issues, how to talk with line officers to get to the root of what is happening, and also sort of being able to manage sort of behaviors before they get to a place of concern, or more concern than a flag may provide. So then we go into a section on what are some of the common indicators used in early intervention systems. And as I mentioned earlier, there isn't sort of a best practice on the number of indicators or which, 5 are the best, but rather there's a group of, I didn't list them out in numbers, so I don't know how many there are, but there are quite a few, which you will see in a second. So you can see here, community complaints, misconduct allegations, reportable uses of force, broken down by types of use of force, the number of shootings or weapon discharges, whether there was an injury or death to an individual when or in the officer's presence or custody, the number of vehicle pursuits or traffic collisions that involved agency equipment. Specifically, although it does mention uses of force, it's also uses of force that may be tied to a charge of someone, say, resisting arrest or disorderly conduct, which have known to sort of been used in particular ways with particular people. There is also sort of when an officer cites multiple people or reasons in a single encounter. And some of these, it isn't necessarily that one use of force will issue a flag, but rather this is the category, and depending on what the agency chooses, whether it's 5 times in a month or 3 times in 3 months, that will then be the threshold. So you can see here it also includes things like violations of body-worn or in-car policies. It includes things like when a prosecutor determines that they cannot file something on someone due to an officer's credibility, that should also be included in an early intervention system. Or when it's found that an officer didn't act constitutionally. Any criminal proceedings against an officer, civil proceedings, administrative proceedings, as well as any disciplinary action taken against officers or non-disciplinary corrective actions. It also includes positive things like awards or commendations. and less so about sort of interactions with people, with members of the public. It also includes following the officer's usage of sick leave, or the types of training they receive, and making sure to follow where an officer may have a second job and is employed off duty. So then the next section, after citing some of the common indicators, is to discuss some of the common interventions that are taken or usually used in agencies when an officer is flagged. And the most common types of intervention tend to be counseling by the immediate supervisor, and those can happen sort of formally or informally. Sometimes those may be because there is a flag in the system, but also to dovetail with that is if a supervisor is proactive, working on the same shift with their line officer, then they may see something in the field in the moment, and after the interaction, counsel them in that moment as well. And the sort of second, or maybe the same most common intervention is training. So when there is a flag and an officer reviews the interaction that was flagged and determines that potentially this behavior could have been corrected if the training was better or the officer understood the training better, then they can recommend that an officer get more training. And in some cases, there are situations where officers may self-identify that they have sort of training needs. And in the system that I will explain later, there's a requirement that that training be done as soon as possible. And another type of intervention that some agencies have used is crisis intervention teams, which typically respond to incidents in the moment when they happen in the street. But the purpose for them in this particular situation is that the officer who was involved may receive immediate peer counseling, which can help sort of reduce stress in some ways and correct future behavior. So other types of interventions that are not necessarily about the officer's, I guess, skills or training as a police officer can be when they are sort of more personal, things that are causing stress on their lives. And interventions for those things could be sending someone to get some kind of professional counseling. And if that isn't sort of what an officer is interested in, there are also opportunities to have peer support groups, which officers in one of the research studies explained that they were more open to peer support groups than sort of professional counseling due to the stigma that exists. And specifically in our research, it was highlighted to us by the experts that we talked to, the New Orleans Police Department's EPIC program, which is a sort of similar peer support program, but it's specifically designed to sort of change the culture within policing, where someone, is willing to intervene when an officer is going to take action that isn't necessarily appropriate. And so we've included that as well in here, and included that now Georgetown Law is providing a train the trainer course on this specific program via Zoom for agencies across the nation. And so this section sort of ends on highlighting the importance of following through on the intervention and making sure that that supervisors are following up to ensure that the officer has taken those actions. And all of that should also be documented in the early intervention system, which I'll go a little bit sort of explain more understandably in the lower section. So the next section here highlights some of the recommendations that the US DOJ has included in their consent decrees with certain agencies across the nation. Some of the indicators that I explained earlier come from these consent decrees as well, but these are sort of recommendations about how best to implement early intervention system and how to use it more than just by the indicators. And I think one of the sort of main best practices that we've included here is that there be very clear policy on the early intervention system, that the goal of the early intervention system be explained to line officers, supervisors, and that they be trained on those policies or protocols with respect to early intervention systems. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, while it's important to follow what individual line officers are doing and collect data on that and flag those things, it is also important, and if possible, use the early intervention system to also collect trends for how supervisors are doing their job, how the precinct as a whole or how a unit is doing. Let's see. There are additionally a recommendation that when officers are compared to each other, that they be done so in peer groups. And below we have an example of how this works in practice. Essentially, it's a peer group of folks who are sort of in the same assignment and go to the same duties to ensure that those comparisons are sort of are actually telling of what is happening in those sections. Some of the other best recommendations are to ensure that any data that is put into the system, and that this should be reiterated in the policies, is that any data should be put in timely, accurately, and that there should be audits of that data as well. And that this data should also be used to assess, just as an agency as a whole, how things are going. Another recommendation is to offer a variety of intervention options because not everything may work the same for every officer, and that any data in the system, aggregate statistical data, should be kept indefinitely, again, used to evaluate sort of longitudinal trends within the agency. This next section highlights some promising practices that we've seen in the literature, which mostly focus on ensuring that an early intervention system is a piece of an accountability system within an agency, and that it is important that any sort of leadership within an agency really advocate for the acceptance of an early intervention system and educate their line officers, their command staff, and unions about why it is important to have an early intervention system. And to show that it isn't just a gotcha system, but rather something to improve not only individual officer skills, not only to improve safety of community members, but also to improve the overall agency performance and relations with the community. And we also reiterate here sort of what the clear policies and protocols should look like, and when training on those clear policies and protocols can happen. So the last section that we've included here is sort of examples of agency EIS programs. Specifically, we include Phoenix and Seattle Police Department, and these two agencies were brought to our attention by the experts that we talked to. The experts also mentioned Detroit PD as well as New Orleans, but I haven't included those because I couldn't find anything on Detroit's system. But perhaps if the board wants more, we can include that for the next sort of version of the report. But we thought it'd be helpful to include here to sort of understand how these systems sort of work in reality. And so the Phoenix Police Department has sort of a 5-phased early intervention system that includes those key components that I discussed earlier that should exist in these systems: identification, interventions, and follow-up. So the way their system works is there is a coordinator for the early intervention system who, once something is identified by the system, will review that incident or that officer's behavior and determine whether or not more should be done. It wasn't clear to me from the material that I read sort of how that determination is made, but that's sort of their sort of system. Once the determination is made that more needs to be done, that coordinator will send a notification from the incident in the system to the supervisor of that employee, and also they will sort of CC the chain of command above the supervisor to sort of ensure that that gets reviewed. And after there's a notification system, the supervisor will review the incident and all sort of documentation that may be connected with that incident, and figure out what is the next step, whether that will be counseling or interventions of other kind. And something that they specifically put into their protocols is that the first line supervisor should work with the second line supervisor to discuss the incident and figure out what is sort of the best way to move forward. And once the supervisor sort of figures out what that might look like, there is a meeting with the individual to discuss sort of what happened. And the protocols specifically encourage the employees to be an active participant in the meetings, to provide feedback, and to really sort of engage in this system. Once that conversation happens, the supervisor then goes back and meets with the other supervisor to sort of figure out what the interventions will be after that discussion. And once they decide, there's another meeting to discuss the interventions with the officer. And they specifically have 3 different types of interventions: supervisory, which tends to be those counseling and guidance conversations between the supervisor and the employee. Then there is training intervention, which would be that the officer needs to take training, and that they require that it be done as soon as possible. And the third type is wellness-based interventions, which includes counseling services, say through an employee assistance program, or through these other programs, a peer support program, critical incident stress management, or their police chaplaincy program. And the final part of their system is the follow-up. That is required to be completed within 45 days. And once that follow-up is completed, there is an alert, or sort of the alert that was originally created in the system must be closed out. So the supervisor needs to document everything that they've done with the officer, sort of the things that they reviewed, the intervention that was determined, and whether or not the officer took that intervention. That documentation is then forwarded to their second line supervisor for approval. Once that second line supervisor approves the documentation of the alert, it is sent back to the early intervention system coordinator. And so Seattle Police Department's system is, they didn't have specific sort of phases lined out in their policies and protocols, but they do have a timeline of the things that are supposed to happen, and they're very specific. So in Phoenix Police Department, there's the 45-day closure period, and Seattle Police Department will have, when the alert comes in, you have 2 days or 3 days to go to the next step, and they outline that very clearly in their policies and protocols. And Seattle Police Department, also has an early intervention system coordinator who sends those notifications to the first line supervisors. So it isn't the supervisors who are necessarily looking through the system on the daily to figure out who needs to be talked to. And Seattle Police Department, in their policies and protocol, also clearly outlines what the different peer groups are. And there's sort of like a table that outlines the peer groups and outlines the different indicators that they are following, and indicates what the thresholds are for each of those peer groups, so that officers will know what it is that could be triggered in the system. Seattle Police Department specifically only uses 10 indicators. They range from use of force to other things. apologize, I didn't include all of those details, but uh, the Phoenix Police Department had probably 5 to 7. And their system, I should also note that the Phoenix Police Department has 2 different sort of indicators. One is for the line officers and one is for the supervisors. It wasn't clear to me that Seattle Police Department has something like that for supervisors, but it is about the line officers. I will say that when, for the Seattle Police Department, when an intervention is needed, they create an early intervention plan, and that sort of follows the incident throughout. And the policy that they have clearly delineates sort of whose role is what and when it needs to be done. And that ranges from the coordinator all the way to the bureau chief. And so it's very clear that most of the people sort of working in the precinct or unit are participating in this system. And I will also say that they have a specific review committee that looks at the precinct level data through the system. But it wasn't clear sort of what the next steps are for that in their policies and protocols. So that is sort of an overview of the information that we've included. I also wanted to share with the subcommittee that in 2018, the board did do a survey of the law enforcement agencies in California. And through that survey, we learned that I believe 36 agencies out of the 140 something, I believe, that responded, do use some kind of early intervention system. And some 29 of those have policies and procedures for those systems. Specifically, I will note that for the Wave 1 agencies, there are, or in the Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies, there are a few who did not say, who didn't mark yes. So it's unclear whether or not they use early intervention systems, but I just thought that that might be useful information for you all to think about when deciding sort of what we want to include or sort of next steps for early intervention system review. So I think that's sort of it, and I'm excited to hear what you all think and any feedback you may have, or anything you want to go over again.
I have a question, Dominique. Thank you. This is so detailed. I really appreciate the level of work that went into this. One was, did you see in your review whether any of the agencies had racial profiling allegations as an indicator? I don't recall if that was included in your presentation. I might have missed that. And then second, do you know if any agencies had sort of any independent oversight over these systems, whether that be through an inspector general's office or civilian structure?
So I think a few of the agencies that I looked at with DOJ, I know specifically LAPD does give access to the inspector general to that system. And I do think that was something that was sort of in many of the consent decrees, where the request was to give sort of audit permission to an outside entity, but I don't know that they each already had an existing entity. So LAPD specifically put Inspector General because they already have that system. But I can go back and check if you want me to make sure that's a little clearer here.
Yeah, I think I just want to see, like, these sound like really incredible, robust systems, but what their implementation looks like in real life, how much the agencies are adhering to these systems, whether they have resulted in change. I think we should recommend their use. I just want to see how they are being used, or if it's just, how loose it is, how strict people are. Yeah, and if the independent audits have shown their efficacy. And then, yeah, I think, did any of them say that racial profiling was an indicator, allegations of racial profiling?
I don't know if it's specified racial profiling.
You all have spoken to experts, but I wonder if that's something we can flag as an indicator in a model policy.
Okay.
Racial or identity profiling, rather, not just racial profiling.
Got it.
Dominique?
Yes.
Just following up on that, Sahar, I agree with you. I think that would be really interesting to take a look at. And I just, first of all, thank you. I thought this is incredible. So, you've packed a lot in, and I think it's really informative, and I just love to kind of have at least a survey of this topic. And it raises a couple of issues, and it may be, or questions in my mind, and this may be, you can tell me if some of this stuff is in the literature or maybe some things that we can look at for future reports. But I do think, I really love the fact that there's the emphasis on also ensuring the supervisors are following through, and doing, that level of accountability. I think that's critical. So I really am glad that that is included. When I first saw the list of all the indicators, my first impression was like, oh my God, there's so many indicators. Like, I wonder if that kind of, in a way, could just dilute the whole, effort, if you have so many. But then it sounds like when you're talking about the Phoenix and your other Seattle, that they selected a number of indicators, a smaller subset. Mm-hmm. And so I do think it would be helpful to include what those are in that portion of the report. But I'm wondering if, did you see much literature on how the indicator of complaints were treated? And in Sahar, this is, I guess they could be the racial identity complaints. Like, are there certain type of complaints that would raise, a more red flag than others? And I would be interested if the literature also talks about, how to address and why it may be important to address if an officer is receiving a certain volume of complaints, and I don't know what the number would be, but maybe it's the literature is talking about this, even if not sustained, like, why are those happening? Is that a flag for a problem, maybe independent of the specific allegation, but there still is a problem? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's something you came across much in the literature so far. I mean, if it has, it may be worth kind of bringing a little more focus on that area, since that is one of our, critical areas, RIPA. Right. Or if not, maybe that's something then for the next year's report.
I think so far in what I've seen, there isn't much detail on how each indicator is necessarily treated. Mm-hmm. But I do think that would be a good part for me to sort of focus on, at least to see if there's something I can provide for you all by November, because that is sort of what the subcommittee is about. But I just generally, I think it's seen that it's sort of any and all sort of complaints and what those dispositions are. It was not specific about the kind or what happens if they're, if they only flag ones that are sustained or not. I feel like that might actually be more agency specific, but I could see if there's literature on that.
Okay, yeah, or something we just tee up, that will be, it could be assuming, or if other board members agree or subcommittee members agree, that may be an area of inquiry, down the line.
Okay.
Oh, and one other question,
yes.
And I'm not sure if it was in there. On the Seattle and Phoenix examples, do you know how long those particular programs have been in effect?
I don't know at the moment, but I can check that out.
Okay. Yeah, at the end of the day, and this I think is beyond this year's report of looking at, metrics and okay, so what happened, right? The comparison of data from before and after.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, in my research, I've definitely noted that this is sort of the background, and figuring out sort of the effectiveness of it, maybe where the subcommittee wants to go next. Yeah.
I thought it was great. I mean, I just found it really informative. And so it is gives us a lot of, food for thought. So great. Thank you.
No,
I'm curious, and I'm not that this is something that can particularly be recommended, but when the DOJ has entered into those consent decrees, have they audited these systems, do you know? On the US DOJ has.
I don't know specifically, but I'm assuming the monitor and a consent decree would be. But I don't
Yeah.
know. There might be sort of those updated reports that they may write that may discuss that. I can look into.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking maybe that would be a place where their effectiveness could be measured because there's like a sort of an independent audit. But that if the DOJ is not there, then I don't think that's a what's it called, objective measure, because if the DOJ is not there, then that effectiveness might be diminished. But I'm just curious how much, like Angela was saying, folks are actually sticking to these recommendations.
I mean, some of the settlements, there would be maybe a monitor and there may be a monitor report
Right.
that we maybe have to access.
Yeah.
But I think maybe Sahar's also talking about what happens sort of after they implement it and if anyone's audited after that.
After the, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you would assume if the DOJ is investigating,
Yeah.
then that's an independent assessment, right? But once they're gone, I don't know what happens.
Dominique, a quick question
Yes.
on the issue of effectiveness. Is there any statistics out there about specifically the examples you give, Phoenix and Seattle, on how often they engage on these early intervention systems?
There may be. I haven't looked into that, so I can note that as a thing to look into.
I think like if we look at that and those who are not don't have intervention systems, that can give us some interesting information.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other sort of comments, questions, follow-up for this particular piece?
Well, I have another question. You talked about the survey and some of the results from the survey about wave 1 and wave 2. So would that information then also be included in this section of the report? You'd be addressing that as well, or what are your thoughts about that?
Depends on what you all would like to see. That survey information is from 2018, so not the newest survey that's done.
Okay.
And so I don't know if it's potentially that is not up to date anymore.
Okay.
Because it was 2 years ago, but it's all up to what you would like to see.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that I don't know. I mean, the others on the subcommittee, that doesn't seem then maybe as enlightening at this point.
Maybe outdated.
Yeah.
Sounds like other subcommittee meetings, there have been updates in different policies.
Yeah.
I think when you're all done with, sorry, my video is off. When you're all done talking about this section, Anna can actually give an update on the survey that we just did. So it did not cover early intervention systems, but it did cover some things about the civilian complaint process itself. So Anna can talk to you all about that. Okay. And then we can think about this, if we continue, if the board wants to do that survey again, and continue that process, we can look at including that as a potential question as well.
Okay.
You mean asking about how these systems are implemented if they exist?
Right. Right.
That would be helpful. I was actually just going to suggest for next. I know Dominique has her hand.
Yeah, she has a lot. I know it's like, well, has a lot to do. Like, this would be really good too.
Yeah,
because it may be interesting. Some departments may be doing some pilot projects around this. I mean, to me, it's no small thing, right? To have this and implement it well, and it'd be interesting to see that if there's some that have a pilot project, for example, and what's happening with it, that's very tailored. But yeah, I think this really builds a fantastic foundation. And again, to me, it's really great if we could put a little bit, if there is some information now about the complaints, like what are some of the issues around complaints as a indicator, that I think that would be nice, but not critical, but I think that would be helpful. And if not, that could be something for next year that we could do a focus on.
That sounds good. I did want to ask specifically, and I think, based on Member Frausto's comment about Seattle and Phoenix, do you all want to include those specific examples in the report, or not include that based on maybe understanding more about whether or not they are effective, or things like that? Just a question up to you all.
Do you mean including what you showed us already, or potentially taking it? I think it's helpful, even if it's not being implemented to the T. I think it's helpful to see what kind of systems could exist out there. I mean, ideally, if these are implemented well, and if supervisors are actually flagging and addressing these behaviors, the issue is just, whether or not the individual department is taking these issues seriously, or it's something else that just goes under the rug. So I think it's helpful to imagine what could work,
Yeah, and it gives it structure. It felt like, okay, here's a structure, so it's not so abstract,
Right.
and yeah, we could be following up, and if it turns out it wasn't successful, that would be important down the road to if we're learning that. I mean, maybe we have some caveats here that,
Right.
we're going to be doing further examination of these particular, learn more about these, because it's also helpful to learn if that didn't work, and so how they were changed.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I like including a disclaimer that we're researching effectiveness, and we weren't able to this year, but this is a topic of further discussion.
Okay, great. If there is nothing else on this specific piece, we can invite Anna to tell you a little bit more about the survey results.
Okay, thank you, Dominique.
You're welcome.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anna Rick. I work with the Civil Rights Enforcement Section at the DOJ. And I believe earlier this year at the May meeting, we discussed the survey that we'd be implementing this year, which included 2 questions around civilian complaints and the board's recommendations, and how the LEAs in Wave 1 and Wave 2 have been implementing those recommendations or taking action based on them. I also want to mention that Rachel Brooks and Tiffany Jantz from the DOJ Research Center are on the line, and they've done a lot of the work in the survey analysis, and I would really welcome them to jump in if they want to talk about the methods in the analysis, or if the subcommittee has questions regarding those methods. What I want to share right now, I was just able to pull at a very high level 4 of the data points around civilian complaints from the analysis of the agency's responses. So as of September 25th, 13 of the 15 agencies in Wave 1 and 2 had completed the survey. And so the data points that I want to share are, there were 2 questions. One was a yes/no question, and in response to that, 5 agencies reported taking actions in response to the board's recommendations regarding civilian complaint procedures. And then there was an open-ended question that allowed agencies to describe the types of actions that they've taken. 3 agencies reported specifically updating civilian complaint procedures to reflect best practices. 4 agencies reported conducting audits of civilian complaint reports to ensure compliance with the agency's bias-free policing policy. And lastly, 9, because civilian review or community advisory boards have been mentioned and discussed in this subcommittee, I just wanted to add that 9 of the agencies report having a civilian review or community advisory board. So I have not yet had the opportunity to look at the agency's responses to these 2 questions, or the question in detail, but I am interested in the subcommittee's direction of, are there questions that you would like us to look at as we review those responses, And is the subcommittee interested in including any of this information or any additional detail that we might be able to pull out in your section of the report? And then I guess I should also add, so I'd really love to hear that from you. And I can add that we shared the analysis of the survey responses at the policy subcommittee yesterday. So we can add that to the chat here if you're interested in accessing the full analysis.
Anna, I have a question. I'm sorry, I know you said this in the beginning, but I'm not sure if I wrote this down correctly. How many agencies completed the survey?
13 of the 15 agencies completed the survey.
Okay, okay. And I apologize again, can you repeat? You had the yes or no question about implementing the recommendations. And what was the second question?
The question, let me see if I... the second question is, please describe the actions your agency has taken in response to the best practices recommendations regarding civilian complaint procedures and forms provided in the board report.
I see. Okay. Thank you. My initial reaction to this is I think we should include information about the responses. I think just to help, it's transparency of what is happening, some responses to the work of this board. I think it's important for our residents and for all of us to know and see. So I don't see a downside. I mean, I guess it depends on this summary question, what type of information you received and what may be of more interest or not. Mm-hmm. But I think at a high level, I would be in favor of including some data around it.
Thank you.
Oh, so I think, Sahar, you're on mute.
Oh, no, I just said, I was just going to say I agree with you. I think we should include it.
And maybe in terms of what to address with the summary, if there's any agency who's doing something different, it might be interesting to learn to, highlight that. Like, what are some changes that are being made given these recommendations?
Right. Is there anything else that the subcommittee members would like to ask or suggest?
I would actually like to ask the subcommittee how they feel about mentioning those agencies that do not answer the surveys, that are not participating in all of this. How are we holding them accountable? They should be called out, for a lack of a better word. At least in my opinion, what do you feel about, we had 2 that didn't answer, which is, I'm happy to see that so many did, but what about those that didn't? What are your feelings on that?
I think it makes sense to write who we surveyed and who hasn't responded. I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've done that before, or here's a list of those who responded to our survey. Not everybody responded. I recall early on as a board when we did a survey, folks didn't have a whole lot of time, and so there was a number of agencies who hadn't responded. I mean, there could be a variety of reasons we may not be aware of why the 2 did not, but I don't see a downside of, here are the 15 and we received the responses from the following agencies. Yeah, that's...
And I note that our team did a lot of follow-up with agencies who are experiencing multiple challenges with fires. And we will continue to follow up with the 2 outstanding agencies and can incorporate their response if we receive them. But yes, your feedback is appreciated in that regard.
Okay. And the folks that did respond, are these just, were there other 2 that responded to part of the survey and not this, or just didn't respond to the survey?
I don't think we have partial responses from the 2 outstanding agencies.
Okay. Okay. So it may be by the time we're ready to have a final draft, you may have more information. They may have their information, possibly.
That's right. And we'll also be preparing an analysis of the responses of Wave 3 agencies, but that's still in the works.
Okay. And remind me, how many agencies are in Wave 3?
I think it's 27 agencies in all.
Okay.
And I believe that all of the Wave 3 agencies have responded.
Okay.
I don't have the documents in front of me right now, but that's my recollection.
Great. Okay.
Yes, I think that's correct. And so there's 12 in Wave 3. There's 15 in Wave 8 in Wave 1, 7 in Wave 2, and I think 12 in Wave 3. And we will definitely continue to follow up with them, as we have been doing already, but we will continue doing so.
Yeah, terrific.
But wasn't it with the two that we didn't get responses from, that we had reached out and to our normal contact and no one got back to us?
In some occasions it was Nancy, and there was also one of the agencies I was able to contact, and I've followed up with them, and they should or have expressed that they already started the survey, but I'm not sure if they've completed it. And this analysis was done before we actually got a hold of them. But the other, we have not, and although I recently did, so hopefully we can push them to complete it by the time the report is done.
Great.
Terrific.
Well,
That's
great. The reason why I say that is because the two agencies that didn't respond to us have been agencies that have been very responsive to RIPA in the past and have participated in a lot. So it was unusual that we weren't able to get in touch with them. So that's why I was asking.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like they're going to get, if not 100% participation, very close to that. So that's great. There is still a little more time. Okay. Well, yeah, I think this is valuable data for this part of the report.
Very good. So we'll have a draft of the more detailed information for this section prepared for the next draft of the report. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Anybody else on our subcommittee have any thoughts or questions on this part, or? Okay. Great. So now let's see, look at our agenda. Let's see. Have it up here. I cannot, I'm having trouble with my computer pulling up my agenda. So do you have that?
Yeah. It's the next section is discussion of the proposed report context, which sort of bled into the presentation. The one thing that we discussed internally was that in the future, perhaps for next year's report, because as folks in the public can see, there's been a tremendous amount of work already gone into this one, and we're late in the year, is coming up with a uniform complaint definition. So I guess maybe if we could perhaps just put a placeholder in the report that this is something we're maybe looking into for next year, that would be helpful, because we've noted how it's such an issue in previous reports that there's so many variable ways they're processed and definitions of complaint.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think the complaint contents are really robust right now in this section, and that a tremendous amount of work have gone into them. So I don't really have any other specific recommendations other than what I just said.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have anything. In addition, I'm really pleased with all the information that we're going to be providing. I think it's great.
If I may, I wanted to ask the subcommittee a question about one of the agency's responses for the matrix. Sorry, I will come back on video here.
Okay.
So the matrix, last subcommittee meeting, I believe it was Member Frausto and a few others who also wanted to know more about what agencies are doing, and actually it also may have been a member of the public, but what agencies are doing to translate their forms. I see that she remembered. So what they're doing to translate their forms, how that works, how they choose which language to translate into. And so I've included that in the most recent version of the matrix, and in the paragraphs there's information about what it is that each agency does. And so I wanted to specifically ask a question about one of the agencies who wanted us to note that so this agency, the Sacramento Police Department, has an online complaint form, but it's actually through their Office of Professional Responsibility. And they wanted to note that even though it isn't translated online, it is, you. I hope so. I can't hear any confirmation yet.
Okay, now I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I lost you for a moment.
Oh, no. Okay.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
the public safety
Okay.
complaint form?
Okay, yes, perfect. Sorry. So this is the complaint form for the Office of Public Safety Accountability. And this form, as you can see, is in English. And if you scroll down on the screen, there is eventually down here a translate, and it shows Google. I did not originally include this in the version of the report that I provided to you all for the September board meeting, but it was brought back to our attention by the agency, and so I wanted to bring it to the board to decide whether or not this would be sufficient to say that the complaint is available in other languages.
Can we just notate that it's available via Google Translate? I mean, Google Translate can be nonsensical when you press the button. You know, it's not translate. There's standards for translation required under federal and state law, and I don't think Google Translate meets them. But it's something, so we can note it. Can we just be specific about that?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I would also add, I'm sorry about that. I would also add, note that it's at the very end of the page. No person I know will scroll all the way down to look for that translate button. That's not even noticeable.
Yeah, and if they don't speak the language, how are they going to know the Google Translate button isn't in the language?
Okay, sounds good. I will include that. And just in case you all haven't necessarily had a chance or remember from September, just a brief summary sort of what the different information is that we learned from these agencies. For the most part, each agency uses either an employee who is bilingual and certified to be bilingual to translate these documents, or they have the ability to contract out with an agency. And most of the agencies specified that the way they chose which languages to translate their forms into depended on the community that they serve. Specifically, I would note that Long Beach Police Department is in a sort of a different position than some of the other agencies because their city council, I believe, sort of passed their own sort of policy about language access in that city. And so that's a reason why they have so much of their documentation translated or specifically in the languages that the city council had identified. And so the only agency that we don't know the details of yet as far as how they choose which language to translate and how that translation happens is Oakland Police Department, but I am in communication with them to get that information hopefully by November.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So now, if there's no more subcommittee board discussion, anybody else have anything they'd like to raise? Sahar, should we open it to now public comment?
Yes.
Okay, great. So perhaps should we, I think as we did this last time, and Aisha, you can, or tell me if this is, should do it a different way, but go by region and ask if anybody from Northern California would like to make a public comment. And I think all they have to do is just unmute on Blue Jeans to be able for us to hear them. Is that correct, Aisha?
Yes, that's correct.
Great. Okay. So let's start with Northern California. Do we have any public comment? Okay. How about any public comment from Central California? Okay. And then, oh, is that somebody joining us? We'll move to Southern California. Any public comment from Southern California? Okay. So that will conclude that portion of our meeting. So we can move now to discussion of next steps.
Yes.
So I have a question along this line. So for Anna and Dominique, in terms of, so we just have some suggestions or so some areas you may be looking into with respect to the areas that you that we discussed and that you have been focused on. Would the next step from your perspective be that we'll, as a board, be receiving then the draft report, given that we're in the beginning of October, and we'll be able to give input on this chapter and this aspect of the report?
Would you like to speak first, Dominique?
Sure, unless you want to go either way. Yes, I think that what I had heard from you all is that for any sort of inclusion of this year's report, to focus on maybe how civilian complaints specifically are used in these systems, if that is available in the literature, to include more detail on the specific indicators in Phoenix PD and Seattle PD. And I believe that setting up sort of for what the subcommittee would like to do in the future, which is talk about the effectiveness of the systems that we are mentioning, but also to think about the systems as a whole, their effectiveness, and perhaps do some future research into the reporting agencies' early intervention systems. And so we will give you sort of an updated version of this for the November meeting, unless you all want to have a separate sort of subcommittee meeting specifically for that.
Okay.
And if there's anything I forgot on that end, I'd love to be reminded.
Yeah, I think you captured it. And I think from my perspective, just seeing this at the draft for the November meeting, I think that would be absolutely, that's fine from my perspective. Sahar or others on the subcommittee, your thoughts
That's
on
totally
that?
fine. Yeah.
Okay. You know, and I think, Anna, the same from your perspective, you know, talking about including the information that you talked about. And I guess some of it's just going to be discretionary on what those summaries are looking like. And, you know, if there are some especially novel approaches or issues to focus on, but that we could, you know, look at that as part of the board work in November.
Okay. Anna, would you like to speak to the survey?
Sure. So our next steps regarding the survey, we'll continue the follow-up with the two outstanding agencies, and we'll have the full survey analysis for all three waves prepared for the November draft of the report. And that should include some more of the details from the agency responses around the civilian complaint recommendations.
Great. Okay. So, Sahar, is there anything else from
No,
your
I don't think
perspective?
so. No, it was
Okay.
covered. Our section's very thorough. Thank you so much to the DOJ for all their work. I don't have
Yeah.
anything else.
Great. So I think then, so we should adjourn a little bit
Yes.
on the early side, but well, thank you everybody. And yeah, to the DOJ, all of you, this is a lot of really, really good work. So really appreciate it. It's going to be I think this part of the report is going to be very strong. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're
Okay.
welcome.